What happens when a man everyone underestimates turns out to be the one holding all the cards? My wife and her parents thought I was just a simple, boring man, until the night they tried to humiliate me at dinner. 5 minutes after they slid an envelope across the table, everything shifted, and the truth landed with far more impact than any of them anticipated. The alarm never woke me anymore. I'd been rising at 5:30 a.m. for so long that my body had internalized the rhythm, pulling me from sleep with the precision of a Swiss watch. In the dim light of our shared apartment, I could hear Lydia's steady breathing from the master bedroom, a room I'd gradually been edged out of over the past year, relegated to the guest room temporarily, while she sorted through some things. I padded quietly to the kitchen, my bare feet making no sound on the cold hardwood floors. The coffee maker had been programmed the night before, another small ritual that brought order to my days. As the machine hummed to life, I opened my laptop on the small breakfast table and began my morning routine, checking overnight market movements, reviewing quarterly reports, and scanning through the endless stream of data that most people found mind-numbing. "God, you're up early again." Lydia's voice cut through the peaceful silence like a blade. She stood in the doorway, wearing a silk robe that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her perfectly styled hair somehow immune to sleep. "Don't you ever just sleep in, live a little?" I looked up from my screen, where I'd been analyzing the latest performance metrics from Hartwell Industries, her father's company. The numbers were impressive, though Gerald would never know that I understood them better than most of his board members. "I like the quiet," I said simply, closing the laptop. "Coffee?" She wrinkled her nose. "That cheap stuff you buy? No thanks. I'll get something decent on my way to the studio." Lydia worked as a lifestyle consultant for wealthy clients, a job that seemed to involve mostly shopping and taking photos for social media. "You know, Nathaniel, sometimes I wonder if you're actually 45 years old trapped in a 38-year-old's body. When was the last time you did something spontaneous?" I considered telling her about the $2.3 million I'd quietly donated to the Children's Hospital last week, or the scholarship fund I'd established that would send 50 underprivileged kids to college. But Lydia had never shown interest in my work or my values, dismissing my job as something boring with numbers whenever her friends asked. "I'm content," I said instead, which only deepened her frown. "Content." She repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Do you know what Veronica said yesterday? She said I must be a saint for putting up with someone so settled. Her husband just bought her a yacht, Nathaniel. A yacht. And here you are, drinking gas station coffee and reading spreadsheets like they're novels." I watched her move through the kitchen with practiced irritation, gathering her designer purse and checking her reflection in every surface she passed. 3 years ago, when we'd first met at a charity gala, she'd found my quiet nature charming. Mysterious, she'd called it. Refreshingly different from all the loud, obnoxious men I usually meet. Now that same quality seemed to grate against her like sandpaper. "I'm having dinner with my parents Thursday," she announced, not looking at me. "They want you to come. Dress nicely, okay? And maybe try to contribute to the conversation this time. Daddy's been working on some big business deals, and it would be nice if you showed some interest in success for once." The irony was so thick I could taste it. Gerald Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Industries, had no idea that the quiet man he barely acknowledged at family gatherings held more shares in his company than anyone except the founding family trust. Through a series of carefully orchestrated acquisitions over the past decade, I'd accumulated a position worth approximately $15 billion, a fact known only to my lawyer, Arthur, my friend Julia, who ran the Meridian Children's Foundation, and Victor Castellanos, the company's CFO, who'd helped facilitate several of the transactions. "Of course," I said. "Should I bring anything?" Lydia paused at the door, and for a moment, something almost like sadness flashed across her face. Just try to be impressive, okay? For once. After she left, the apartment fell back into blessed silence. I reopened my laptop and pulled up the secure folder labeled Holdings. The numbers still seemed surreal, even to me. What had started as a modest investment in Hartwell Industries 15 years ago, back when I was a junior analyst with more curiosity than capital, had grown into something extraordinary through patience, research, and an analytical mind that could spot patterns others missed. The beautiful irony was that Gerald himself had unknowingly sold me many of these shares during various market downturns, convinced that his company was overvalued and eager to cash out portions of his holdings. He'd never bothered to track the buyer, assuming it was just another institutional investor. Meanwhile, I'd been quietly accumulating power while living in a modest townhouse and shopping at discount stores. My phone buzzed with a text from Julia. "Morning coffee? I have updates on the foundation." I smiled and typed back, "Usual place, 20 minutes." The Meridian Children's Foundation was my proudest achievement, though my name appeared nowhere on their public materials. Over the past 5 years, my anonymous donations had funded 3 new pediatric wings, countless scholarships, and a revolutionary research program for childhood diseases. Julia knew the truth about my financial situation. She had to, given the size and frequency of my contributions, but she'd never once suggested I should live differently or spend more on myself. That was the difference between real friends and family who only tolerated you. I closed the laptop, showered, and dressed in my usual uniform: khakis, a button-down shirt from a department store, and comfortable walking shoes. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what Lydia's friends thought I was, a middle manager type, unremarkable and financially modest. The disguise was perfect because it wasn't really a disguise at all. I genuinely preferred simple pleasures and quiet satisfaction over flashy displays of wealth. But as I walked to meet Julia, I found myself thinking about Thursday's dinner. Gerald and Marlene Hartwell had never been openly cruel to me, but their dismissal was perhaps worse than outright hostility. They looked through me as if I were furniture, making conversation around me rather than with me. Gerald had once introduced me to a business associate as Lydia's husband, nice enough fellow, works in accounting or something. I'd been analyzing Fortune 500 companies since before Gerald's last major promotion. The coffee shop near Julia's office was a small, independent place that served excellent espresso and minded its own business. I found her at our usual table in the back corner, her warm smile cutting through the morning's lingering frustration. "You look troubled," she said immediately. Julia had an uncanny ability to read people, probably developed from years of managing donors and volunteers with hidden agendas. "Family issues?" "Dinner with the in-laws Thursday." I settled into the chair across from her. "Lydia's been particularly critical lately. I think her parents are putting pressure on her to push me towards something more ambitious." Julia's laugh was dry. "If they only knew." "That's just it," I said, accepting the coffee she'd already ordered for me. "They don't want to know. Lydia's never asked about my work, never shown interest in my investments or my values. She's decided I'm boring, and that's become her reality." "And you've never corrected her because—" I considered the question seriously. "Because I wanted to see who she really was. When someone thinks you have nothing to offer, they show you their true character. Lydia fell in love with what she thought was my potential, not who I actually am." Julia nodded thoughtfully. She was one of the few people who understood my philosophy of quiet observation. "What's Thursday's dinner really about?" "I'm not sure yet, but Lydia's been dropping hints about big opportunities and telling me to dress nicely. Gerald's been working on some major deals lately. I've been watching the company's movements. I suspect they want to offer me something." "A job?" "More likely a test. See if the boring husband can be molded into something more suitable for their family image." Julia leaned back in her chair, studying my face. "You know, Most people in your position would have walked away years ago. Why do you stay? It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself more frequently. Because I believe in giving people enough rope, I said finally. Lydia and her family have shown me who they are through their treatment of someone they consider beneath them. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I acted. And now you are? I thought about Lydia's parting words that morning, the casual cruelty of suggesting I try to be impressive for once. I thought about the years of small dismissals, the way Gerald looked past me at family gatherings, the way Marlene's smiles never quite reached her eyes when she spoke to me. Almost, I said. Julia reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. The Foundation's quarterly report, she said casually, but her eyes held a different message. Everything's documented exactly as you requested. Dates, amounts, recipients, all of it. I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket. Thank you. Nathaniel, she said as I stood to leave. Whatever happens Thursday, remember that some people are incapable of recognizing value when it's sitting right in front of them. That's their limitation, not yours. Walking home, I found myself thinking about patterns. In my professional life, I'd made my fortune by recognizing patterns others missed, market trends, company behaviors, the subtle signals that preceded major shifts. Human behavior followed patterns too, and I'd been studying Lydia and her family for 3 years. The pattern was clear. They respected only power they could see, wealth they could measure, success they could brag about. My quiet competence and hidden generosity meant nothing to them because it didn't enhance their social standing. I was a liability in their world, a reminder that Lydia had somehow married beneath herself. But patterns, once recognized, could be disrupted. Back at the apartment, I went to my home office. Really just a converted closet with a desk and filing cabinet. From the locked bottom drawer, I pulled out a folder labeled Personal Holdings and spread the contents across my desk. Share certificates, trust documents, board resolutions, voting proxies. The paper trail of a decade's worth of careful acquisitions. On paper, I was one of the most powerful shareholders in Hartwell Industries. In Gerald's mind, I was a disappointment who worked in accounting or something. My phone rang. Victor Castellanos. Nathaniel, good morning. I wanted to give you a heads up about Thursday. Oh? Gerald's called a family meeting. He's been talking about cleaning house and setting expectations. I think he's planning something for you. Victor had been the CFO at Hartwell Industries for 8 years, and he was one of the few people who knew the true extent of my holdings. We'd worked together on several acquisitions, always through intermediary companies and trust structures that kept my name hidden. He was a good man, competent, and discreet, and I trusted his judgment. What kind of something? I'm not certain, but he's been asking questions about company positions, entry-level opportunities. He mentioned wanting to help family members find their place in the organization. I almost laughed. Gerald was planning to offer me a job at the company I partially owned. The condescension was breathtaking. I see. And you'll be available Thursday evening if needed? Absolutely. I'll be at the Grandview, same restaurant where you're having dinner. Pure coincidence, of course. Of course. Thank you, Victor. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and studied the documents spread before me. For years, I'd been content to remain in the shadows, quietly building wealth and giving it away, secure in my own sense of purpose. But Lydia and her family had mistaken my contentment for weakness, my modesty for failure. They were about to learn the difference. The Hartwell family mansion sat on 12 acres of perfectly manicured grounds in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, a monument to Gerald's success and his wife Marlene's impeccable taste. I'd been there dozens of times over the past 3 years, but I'd never stopped noticing how the house seemed designed to intimidate. Soaring ceilings, marble floors that echoed with every footstep, artwork that cost more than most people's homes. It was here, 6 months ago, that I'd experienced what I now thought of as my moment of clarity. The occasion had been Gerald's birthday celebration, a lavish affair with 50 guests from the city's business and social elite. I'd arrived with Lydia, wearing my usual department store suit, and had immediately felt the familiar weight of collective dismissal. The other guests looked through me as if I were part of the catering staff, their conversations flowing around me without acknowledgement. I'd found myself in Gerald's private study, seeking a moment of quiet away from the noise. The room was Gerald's sanctuary, lined with leather-bound books he'd never read and photographs of himself with various politicians and celebrities. I was admiring a first-edition Hemingway when voices in the hallway caught my attention. Honestly, don't know what she was thinking. Marlene's voice, carefully modulated but sharp with frustration. The man has no ambition whatsoever. Gerald's response was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. I've offered to make introductions, get him started somewhere decent, but he seems perfectly content with his little bookkeeping job. Lydia's getting restless, I can see it. Can't blame her. She's a beautiful, accomplished woman. She could have married anyone, senators, CEOs, old money families. Instead, she's stuck with someone who clips coupons and drives a 10-year-old sedan. They were standing just outside the study door, completely unaware of my presence. I remained perfectly still, listening to them dissect my character with the clinical precision of pathologists. "What should we do?" Marlene asked. "Give him one more chance. If he can't rise to the occasion, maybe it's time Lydia considered her options. Life's too short to be dragged down by someone holding you back." Those words stayed with me for months, sharpening years of subtle dismissals into sudden clarity. To Gerald and Marlene, I wasn't just underperforming. I was a liability to their daughter's future. If they'd bothered to look a little closer, they might have noticed that the son-in-law they dismissed had been quietly building a stake in Gerald's company since before Lydia and I even met. They might have learned that I held advanced degrees in both finance and economics from institutions that would have impressed even their selective social circle. They might also have discovered that my so-called little bookkeeping job involved managing investment portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but they had never bothered to look. Now, sitting in my home office with Thursday's dinner approaching, I pulled up the digital files that told the real story of my relationship with the Hartwell family. Bank statements showing my anonymous donations to causes Gerald publicly supported, always in amounts that dwarfed his own contributions. Email chains with Victor detailing strategic acquisitions that had strengthened Hartwell Industries' market position. Photographs from charity events where I stood in the background while Gerald accepted credit for initiatives I had funded. The pattern was consistent. I provided value, they claimed credit, and my contributions remained invisible. My phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. "Dinner moved to 7 p.m. Daddy wants to discuss something important. Please try to make a good impression." I typed back, "Of course, looking forward to it." The irony was exquisite. Gerald wanted to discuss something important with a man he considered irrelevant at a dinner designed to address a problem that existed only in his imagination. I spent the next hour reviewing the latest quarterly reports from Hartwell Industries. The company was performing well, but there were concerning trends in their expansion strategy: overextension in emerging markets, aggressive debt leveraging, and a concerning dependence on short-term gains over sustainable growth. As a major shareholder, I had legitimate concerns about Gerald's leadership decisions. As a despised son-in-law, my opinions would be dismissed without consideration. That afternoon, I met Arthur Blackwood at his law office downtown. Arthur had been my attorney for over a decade, a meticulous man in his late 40s who specialized in trust and estate planning for high-net-worth individuals. His office reflected his personality: organized, understated, and completely professional. "You sounded cryptic on the phone," Arthur said, as I settled into the chair across from his desk. "What's this about?" I outlined Thursday's dinner and my growing sense that the Hartwell family was planning some kind of intervention. Arthur listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. So you think Gerald's going to offer you a position at the company? It fits the pattern. They see me as a charity case who needs guidance. Gerald probably thinks he's being generous, offering his unsuccessful son-in-law a chance to finally make something of himself. Arthur's smile was thin. The man who owns $15 billion in shares of his company. The same. What do you want from me? I'd been thinking about this question for weeks. Preparation. If they're planning to humiliate me publicly, I want to be ready to respond appropriately. Define appropriately. Truthfully, completely, with documentation. Arthur leaned back in his chair, studying my face. Nathaniel, you've spent years building a position of enormous power while maintaining complete anonymity. Are you prepared to give that up for the satisfaction of proving a point? It was a fair question. My anonymity had been a source of freedom. It allowed me to make investment decisions without public scrutiny, to donate to causes without social pressure, to live simply without explaining my choices. Once the truth came out, that freedom would be gone forever. I've been asking myself the same question, I admitted. But I keep coming back to a simple reality. They've made their choice about who I am without ever bothering to learn the truth. They've decided I'm worthless based on appearances and assumptions. At some point, willful ignorance becomes a choice that deserves consequences. Arthur nodded slowly. What kind of documentation are we talking about? Everything. Share certificates, voting proxies, donation records, trust documents. I want them to understand exactly how wrong they've been, and exactly what their dismissal has cost them. This could destroy your marriage. My marriage was destroyed the moment Lydia decided I was an embarrassment. I've just been too stubborn to admit it. Arthur opened his laptop and began typing. I'll prepare a comprehensive portfolio. Shareholdings, voting rights, charitable contributions, everything properly documented and verified. How do you want it presented? Simply. Clearly. No legal jargon they can hide behind or misinterpret. I want the numbers to speak for themselves. And after? What's your long-term strategy? I'd been thinking about this too. That depends on how Thursday goes. If they're capable of acknowledging their mistake and treating me with basic respect, maybe we can move forward. If not, I shrugged. I have options they can't even imagine. Arthur spent the next hour outlining various scenarios and their legal implications. Divorce proceedings, shareholder rights, potential challenges to my holdings. The conversation was clinical and thorough, but underneath the legal technicalities was a simple truth. I held more power in this situation than anyone realized. One more thing, Arthur said as I prepared to leave. Are you absolutely certain about this course of action? Once you reveal your position, there's no going back. Your relationship with Lydia, with her family, with your own privacy, everything changes. I thought about Lydia's words that morning, her casual suggestion that I try to be impressive for once. I thought about Gerald's dismissive introductions and Marlene's polite but cold smiles. I thought about 3 years of being treated as a disappointment by people who had never bothered to learn who I actually was. I'm certain, I said. That evening I had dinner alone at my townhouse. A simple meal of pasta and salad, eaten while reading the latest analysis of emerging market trends. The contrast with Thursday's upcoming dinner wasn't lost on me. Tonight, I was content and peaceful, surrounded by books and quiet satisfaction. Tomorrow night, I would sit in an expensive restaurant, while people who thought they knew me attempted to reshape my life according to their limited understanding. The difference was that tomorrow night, I would finally have the opportunity to show them who I really was. My phone rang around 9 o'clock. Julia. How are you feeling about Thursday? She asked, without preamble. Oddly calm. You? Nervous for you? Are you sure about this? Julia was one of the few people who understood the full scope of what I was planning. Through her work at the foundation, she'd witnessed years of my anonymous generosity, and she'd also seen how Lydia and her family treated me at public events. She knew better than anyone the gap between my public image and private reality. "I'm sure," I said, "but I appreciate your concern. Promise me something. Whatever happens Thursday, don't let anger drive your decisions. You're better than that." She was right, of course. Anger would make me just another wealthy man throwing his weight around. But I wasn't angry. I was something much more dangerous. I was analytical, patient, and completely prepared. "This isn't about anger," I told her. "It's about truth. They've built their opinion of me on assumptions and appearances. Thursday night, they're going to learn the difference between what they think they know and what actually is." After hanging up, I spent an hour in my home office organizing files and reviewing documents. Everything was in order, every detail confirmed and cross-referenced. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of years of quiet preparation. But tonight, I allowed myself one small indulgence. I opened a bottle of wine, not an expensive one, just something I enjoyed, and sat in my reading chair with a book about market psychology. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Gerald and his family saw me as someone without ambition or sophistication, I was spending my evening studying the very forces that had made me wealthier than they could imagine. At 10:30, I heard Lydia's key in the lock. She came in laughing, apparently having spent the evening with friends, and barely acknowledged my presence as she moved through the apartment. "Don't stay up too late," she called from the hallway. "Tomorrow's important." She had no idea how important. I finished my wine and closed the book, then went to my office one final time. From the locked drawer, I pulled out a single document, a summary of my total holdings in Hartwell Industries, prepared by Arthur and verified by Victor. The numbers were staggering even to me. Tomorrow night, Gerald Hartwell would learn that the son-in-law he'd brushed off as a burden actually held the power to influence every major decision his company made. Lydia would discover that the husband she considered boring and unsuccessful had been quietly building wealth that dwarfed her family's fortune. And I would finally stop pretending that their ignorance was anything other than a choice they'd made and would have to live with. Thursday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything seem sharper, more defined. I woke at my usual time, but instead of my normal routine, I found myself standing at the window of my townhouse, watching the city come alive in the early morning light. Today felt different, final. Lydia had left early for a spa appointment. "I need to look perfect tonight," she'd announced, leaving me alone with my thoughts and preparations. I made my coffee, opened my laptop, and began what would likely be my last morning of anonymity. The financial markets were active, and Hartwell Industries stock was up 3% on news of a potential merger with a European firm. I knew about the merger, of course. As a major shareholder, I'd been briefed by Victor weeks ago. Gerald had been pursuing the deal aggressively, seeing it as his legacy-defining achievement. What he didn't know was that the success of the merger would require approval from shareholders holding more than 60% of the company's voting shares. What he really didn't know was that I controlled nearly 30% of those votes. My phone buzzed with a message from Victor. "Dinner still on track? I'll be at the Grandview by 6:45. I typed back, "Yes, thank you for being there." Victor's presence would be crucial. As CFO, he could verify any claims I made about my holdings, and his support would lend credibility to revelations that might otherwise seem impossible. More importantly, he was one of the few people who'd witnessed both my financial acumen and the Hartwell family's dismissive treatment of me. Around noon, I received an unexpected call from Gerald himself. "Nathaniel, good to hear your voice." His tone was jovial in the way that suggested he was about to ask for something. "Looking forward to tonight. Marlene's made reservations at the Grandview. You know the place. Very nice, very appropriate for important conversations." "I'm looking forward to it too." "Excellent, excellent. Now, I hope you'll come with an open mind tonight. Lydia's mentioned that you might be ready for some new challenges, some opportunities to really apply yourself. I think you'll find what I have to say quite interesting." The condescension was so thick, I could practically see it through the phone. Gerald was calling to prepare me for my own intervention, making sure I'd be appropriately grateful for whatever crumbs he planned to offer. "I'm always interested in new opportunities," I said, which was entirely true, just not in the way he imagined. "That's the spirit. Oh, and Nathaniel? Dress nicely tonight. The Grandview has standards, and this is the kind of conversation that requires a certain gravitas." After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and marveled at the man's complete lack of self-awareness. Gerald was lecturing me about gravitas while planning to offer charity to someone who could buy and sell his company several times over. I spent the afternoon in final preparations. Arthur delivered a leather portfolio containing every document I might need: share certificates, voting proxies, charitable donation records, and a comprehensive summary of my total holdings. The portfolio was thin but devastating, containing enough financial firepower to reshape the entire evening's conversation. Julia stopped by around 4 o'clock, ostensibly to drop off some foundation paperwork, but really to check on my state of mind. "You seem remarkably calm," she observed, settling into my reading chair. "I am calm. This has been building for 3 years. I'm ready for it to be finished." "And Lydia? Are you ready for what this might do to your marriage?" I considered the question seriously. "Julia, my marriage ended the day Lydia decided I was an embarrassment. Everything since then has just been postponing the inevitable. Tonight, we'll finally stop pretending." She studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd spent years reading people's motivations. "You're not doing this for revenge. No, I'm doing it for clarity. They've built their entire relationship with me on false assumptions. It's time for everyone to deal with reality, including you, especially me." Julia left around 5, and I began getting ready for dinner. I showered, shaved carefully, and then faced the question of what to wear. Gerald had emphasized dressing nicely, and I could imagine him expecting me to show up in an ill-fitting suit from a discount store, reinforcing his image of me as someone who didn't understand proper presentation. Instead, I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out a suit I'd bought 2 years ago, but never worn. A perfectly tailored charcoal gray from a Savile Row tailor, accompanied by a silk tie that cost more than most people spent on an entire outfit. The clothes fit perfectly, transforming my appearance from harmless middle manager to serious professional. Looking in the mirror, I realized this was probably closer to how I should have been dressing all along. My preference for simple, inexpensive clothes had been genuine, but it had also been a form of camouflage, allowing me to move through the world without attracting attention to my actual circumstances. Tonight, camouflage would be counterproductive. Lydia returned from her spa day looking radiant and expensive, her hair and makeup professionally done, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She stopped short when she saw me. "Oh, you look different. Better or worse?" She studied me with the analytical gaze of someone reassessing a familiar object. "Better. Much better. I didn't know you owned clothes like that." "I'm full of surprises." Something in my tone made her pause, but she was too focused on the evening ahead to pursue the thought. "Daddy called this afternoon. He's very excited about tonight. He thinks you're ready to hear about some real opportunities." "I'm sure I am." We took a taxi to the Grandview, Lydia chattering nervously about her father's business successes and the importance of making a good impression. I listened with half my attention while reviewing my strategy for the evening. The key would be timing, letting Gerald reveal his true intentions before I revealed mine. The Grandview was exactly the kind of restaurant Gerald would choose for a power play: expensive, exclusive, and designed to intimidate anyone who didn't belong in such rarefied circles. The maitre d' recognized Lydia immediately and led us to a prime table where Gerald and Marlene were already waiting. Gerald stood to greet us, his handshake firm and his smile sharp with anticipation. He was dressed in what was probably a $5,000 suit, every inch the successful CEO preparing to dispense wisdom to a lesser mortal. Marlene offered her cheek for air kisses, her smile polite but distant as always. "Nathaniel, you look well," Gerald said, his tone suggesting mild surprise. "That's a nice suit." "Thank you." "Please, sit. I've taken the liberty of ordering wine, a 2015 Bordeaux that I think you'll find educational." Educational. Even his wine choices were condescending. As we settled into our seats, I noticed Victor at a table across the restaurant, dining alone and reading what appeared to be a business journal. He caught my eye briefly and nodded almost imperceptibly. "So," Gerald said once the wine had been poured and tasted with great ceremony, "I suppose you're wondering why I wanted to have this dinner." "I'm curious, yes." Gerald exchanged a meaningful look with Marlene, then leaned forward with the air of a man about to change someone's life. "Nathaniel, you've been part of our family for 3 years now, and Marlene and I have been watching your trajectory with interest. Trajectory. As if my life were a projectile that had failed to reach its target. We've noticed," Marlene added with carefully modulated sympathy, "that you seem to be in something of a holding pattern professionally. And while there's nothing wrong with being content with modest circumstances, we worry that you might be limiting yourself." Lydia nodded earnestly, playing her role in what was clearly a rehearsed intervention. "I've been telling them how smart you are, how you just need the right opportunity to really shine." The setup was perfect. They'd positioned themselves as concerned family members, trying to help an underachieving relative reach his potential. Gerald was about to offer me salvation, and I was expected to be grateful for his generosity. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said. "What kind of opportunity did you have in mind?" Gerald's smile widened. "Well, as it happens, Hartwell Industries is expanding our financial analysis department. We need someone with attention to detail, someone who can handle routine portfolio management and basic market research. It's not glamorous work, but it's a foot in the door at a major corporation, and with the right attitude and dedication, there's potential for advancement." He was offering me an entry-level position at the company I partially owned. The audacity was breathtaking. "The salary would be quite competitive," Marlene added. $65,000 to start, with full benefits and opportunities for professional development." $65,000. I donated more than that to charity last month without thinking about it. "Of course," Gerald continued, "this would require a certain level of commitment. We'd need to see real enthusiasm, real drive, no more of this casual attitude toward success. The corporate world demands excellence, and frankly, we'd be taking a risk bringing in someone without a proven track record." Lydia reached over and squeezed my hand. "Isn't that wonderful? Daddy's willing to give you a real chance." I looked around the table at their expectant faces, Gerald smugly generous, Marlene politely encouraging, Lydia hopeful that her disappointing husband might finally become someone she could be proud of. They were so certain of their narrative, so confident in their understanding of who I was and what I needed. "That's quite an offer," I said carefully. "Very generous." "I like to think so," Gerald said. "Not every CEO would be willing to take a chance on family like this, but I believe in giving people opportunities to prove themselves." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. "I've had our HR department draw up a preliminary offer letter. Obviously, there would be a probationary period, background checks, the usual procedures. But if you're serious about finally making something of yourself, this could be exactly what you need." The envelope sat between us like a challenge. Inside, I knew, would be a formal job offer that Gerald considered an act of extraordinary generosity, a chance for his worthless son-in-law to finally contribute something meaningful to the family's success. I picked up the envelope but didn't open it. Before I look at this, I have something I'd like to share with all of you. Gerald's eyebrows rose slightly. Oh? I reached into my jacket and pulled out the leather portfolio Arthur had prepared. It was thin and understated, giving no hint of the financial earthquake contained within its pages. You see, Gerald, you're absolutely right that this conversation requires honesty about professional circumstances and future opportunities. But I think there might be some information you should have before we proceed. I opened the portfolio and removed a single document, the summary of my holdings in Hartwell Industries. The numbers were clearly printed, verified by Arthur's firm and cross-referenced with official corporate records. This is a summary of my current shareholdings in Hartwell Industries, I said, placing the document on the table where everyone could see it. As you can see, I currently own approximately 28.7% of the company's outstanding shares, representing a market value of just over $15 billion. The silence that followed was absolute. Gerald stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. Marlene had gone completely pale, her wineglass frozen halfway to her lips. Lydia was looking back and forth between the document and my face, her mouth slightly open. This is... Gerald's voice was barely a whisper. This is impossible. I assure you it's completely accurate. Victor Castellanos, your CFO, can verify these holdings. In fact, he's sitting right over there if you'd like to confirm. I gestured toward Victor's table. He looked up as if noticing us for the first time, then stood and walked over with the measured pace of a man who'd been expecting this moment. Good evening, everyone, Victor said pleasantly. Gerald, Nathaniel asked me to be available tonight in case you had any questions about his shareholdings. Gerald's face had shifted from pale to red. Victor, what the hell is going on here? Nathaniel has been acquiring shares in the company for over a decade, Victor replied calmly. All transactions were properly documented and filed with the appropriate regulatory agencies. He's been one of our most significant shareholders for several years now. But how? Marlene managed to ask. I removed another document from the portfolio, a summary of my professional background and qualifications. I have master's degrees in finance and economics from Wharton and Chicago, respectively. For the past 15 years, I've worked as an independent investment analyst, managing portfolios for high-net-worth clients and institutional investors. My personal investments have performed quite well, particularly my position in Hartwell Industries. Lydia was staring at me as if I'd suddenly sprouted a second head. You told me you worked in accounting. You never asked what kind of accounting. You decided my work was boring and never showed any interest in the details. Gerald found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. $15 billion? Approximately, yes, based on today's closing price. I removed another document. I've also been the anonymous donor behind several charitable initiatives you've publicly supported. The children's hospital wing that bears your name? I funded that. The scholarship program you announced last year? Also mine. In total, I've donated about $47 million to various causes over the past 5 years, always anonymously. The numbers seemed to hit Gerald like physical blows. Each revelation stripped away another layer of his assumptions, revealing the vast gap between his perception and reality. Why? Lydia's voice was barely audible. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at her with something that might have been sadness. Because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer, and now I know. Gerald's business instincts finally kicked in, overriding his shock. The merger, the European deal, you could... block it? Yes, I could, or approve it, depending on the terms and how the company's leadership handles the transition. The implications crashed over him like a wave. Gerald had been planning to offer me a junior position at a company where I was actually one of the most powerful shareholders. He'd been condescending to someone who could influence every major decision the company made. "What do you want?" Gerald asked, his voice hollow. I closed the portfolio and sat back in my chair. "I want you to understand that your assumptions about people have consequences. You've spent 3 years treating me like a charity case, dismissing my value, and encouraging your daughter to see me as an embarrassment. You did this without ever bothering to learn who I actually was or what I actually contributed." "Nathaniel," Lydia started, but I held up a hand. "You had your chance to speak," I said quietly. "For 3 years you've made it clear that you consider me boring, unambitious, and unsuccessful. You've suggested I lack drive, sophistication, and the ability to provide for you properly. You did this while I was quietly building wealth that dwarfs your family's fortune and supporting causes that align with the values you claim to hold." I stood up, leaving Gerald's job offer unopened on the table next to the documentation of my actual financial position. "The merger you're pursuing, Gerald? It requires shareholder approval. I suggest you think very carefully about how you want to proceed, both professionally and personally, because the man you just offered a $65,000 job to is about to become the most influential voice in your company's future." The restaurant had grown quiet around us, other diners sensing the drama playing out at our table. Gerald sat frozen, his face a mask of shock and dawning realization. Marlene looked as if she might faint. Lydia was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, part awe, part terror, part recognition that everything she thought she knew had just been proven wrong. "Victor," I said, "I think we should schedule a board meeting for next week. There are some strategic decisions that require shareholder input." "Of course," Victor replied.